Imagine celebrating your 30th wedding anniversary, only to discover your husband is having an affair with his secretary. That's exactly what happened to me. After 3 decades together, I found myself abandoned for a woman half my age. But what my husband didn't realize was that I had been quietly managing our finances all those years, including his substantial pension. Sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs you to step aside and watch. This is my story. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I met Robert Mitchell during my sophomore year at Northwestern University. I was studying accounting, and he was pursuing his business degree with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. We literally bumped into each other at the library. I dropped my stack of finance textbooks, and he helped me pick them up. It was such a cliché meet cute that we'd laugh about it for years afterward. What drew me to Robert was his ambition. He had this drive, this hunger to succeed that I found irresistible. Coming from a modest family in Ohio, he was determined to build the kind of wealth and security his parents never had. I admire that about him, and I think what drew him to me was my practicality. While he dreamed big, I was the one who could map out how to get there. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. By then, we had both graduated. I had landed a job at an accounting firm in Chicago, and Robert had secured an entry-level position at Hartwell Industries, a manufacturing company with offices nationwide. The wedding was small but elegant. My parents, who had saved their whole lives for my special day, gave us a beautiful ceremony at a charming venue in Lake Forest. Robert's parents gave us their blessing and a modest check that we put toward our first apartment. Those early years were tight financially, but we were happy. We were building something together. I still remember our first apartment, a 1-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and a temperamental radiator. But it was ours. We'd spend weekends painting the walls and hunting for furniture at thrift shops. At night, we'd sit on our second-hand sofa and talk about our future. The house we'd buy, the family we'd have, the places we'd travel. Robert was a natural at his job. Within 3 years, he received his first significant promotion. I still remember how proud I was watching him come home with a bottle of champagne, announcing that he was now a department manager. We celebrated that night, dreaming even bigger dreams. I had been promoted at my firm as well, and with our combined incomes increasing, we decided it was time to start a family. Our daughter, Emma, was born a year later. She had Robert's dark hair and my green eyes. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt a completeness I had never experienced before. Robert stood beside the hospital bed, tears in his eyes, promising our daughter the world. 2 years later, our son Michael joined our family. Our life seemed perfect, a loving marriage, 2 beautiful children, and careers that were steadily advancing. When the children were young, we decided that I would scale back my hours at the accounting firm to take on more of the parenting responsibilities. It wasn't an easy decision. I loved my work, but childcare costs were astronomical, and Robert's career was taking off. His salary alone could support us comfortably, especially after he was promoted to regional sales director. It makes financial sense, I reasoned, though part of me mourned the career I was putting on hold. And I can do some consulting work from home to keep my skills sharp. Robert supported my decision, though in retrospect, I wonder if that was the beginning of a subtle shift in our relationship. The balance of power tipped slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I was too busy raising our children and managing our household to notice. Despite scaling back professionally, I never relinquished control of our finances. That was my domain. Every month, I paid the bills, balanced the checkbook, and made investment decisions. Robert would joke that he couldn't tell a stock from a bond, but he trusted me implicitly with our financial future. "You're the numbers genius," he'd say, passing me his paycheck. Work your magic. And I did. I made sure. We lived below our means, maximizing retirement contributions and building a robust investment portfolio. When Robert received bonuses, which became increasingly substantial as he climbed the corporate ladder, I would allocate a small portion for immediate enjoyment, perhaps a family vacation or a home improvement project. But the bulk went into our investments. We bought our first home when Emma was 5 and Michael was 3, a 4-bedroom colonial in Evanston with a spacious backyard where the children could play. As Robert's salary increased, we could have moved to a more upscale neighborhood, but I insisted on staying put and putting the difference into savings. Real wealth isn't about showing off, I would tell Robert when he'd occasionally suggest a larger house or a luxury car. It's about security. He would acquiesce, trusting my judgment. After all, our net worth was growing steadily under my management. When Robert turned 40, he was promoted to vice president of sales at Hartwell. It came with a significant salary increase, a generous bonus structure, and, most importantly for our story, enrollment in the company's executive pension plan. The plan was exceptionally generous, designed to retain top talent by providing a comfortable retirement. The company would match contributions at 150% up to a certain percentage of his salary, with the funds vesting gradually over 10 years. I remember sitting with the HR benefits package spread across our dining room table, calculating projections while Robert nursed a celebratory scotch. This pension could be worth millions by the time you retire, I said, barely containing my excitement. But we need to maximize it from day one. Robert chuckled. Whatever you say, Alice. You haven't steered us wrong yet. That night, I drafted a comprehensive financial plan that would see us comfortably through retirement. The pension was the centerpiece, but I diversified with other investments as well. I set up the contributions, the allocations, everything. Robert signed where I indicated, barely glancing at the documents. Financial matters bored him. He was happy to leave them in my capable hands. What he didn't realize, what I myself didn't fully anticipate at the time, was that I was becoming the sole architect of our financial future. While this suited me fine, it created a significant blind spot for Robert. He knew we were doing well financially, but he had no real understanding of the specifics. He saw the results, our comfortable lifestyle, our ability to send both children to private universities without loans, our annual vacations, but he was disconnected from the mechanics that made it all possible. As our children grew, so did our marriage, at least on the surface. We celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, attended school functions and graduations, hosted holiday gatherings for both our families. We looked like the perfect couple, the embodiment of the American dream. Robert continued to advance at Hartwell, eventually becoming executive vice president with oversight of operations across multiple states. His travel increased, but I didn't mind. I had my consulting work, which had grown from a part-time gig to a respectable client list, and I enjoyed having the house to myself occasionally. When Emma left for college, studying pre-med at Johns Hopkins, we felt the first real pangs of empty nest syndrome. Michael followed 2 years later, heading to MIT for computer science. Our house, once filled with the chaos and laughter of family life, grew quieter. Robert and I found ourselves alone together for the first time in decades. That's when the cracks in our marriage, which had been forming beneath the surface for years, began to show. Without the children as buffers, we discovered we had less and less to talk about. Robert was consumed by his work, and I had my consulting and volunteer activities. We operated more like business partners than husband and wife. The passion that had once drawn us together had faded, replaced by a comfortable routine. I tried to reignite the spark. I suggested weekend getaways, cooking classes, even marriage counseling. Robert would participate half-heartedly, then retreat back into his work. I told myself it was just a phase, that once he retired, we'd reconnect. After all, We had built this life together. 3 decades of marriage couldn't just evaporate. Our 30th wedding anniversary approached as both our children were establishing their own adult lives. Emma was in her residency at Mayo Clinic, engaged to another doctor she'd met during medical school. Michael had landed a prestigious position at a tech firm in Boston and was dating someone serious for the first time. Robert and I were officially empty nesters, with retirement on the horizon. I planned an anniversary trip to Napa Valley, a week of wine tasting, gourmet meals, and hopefully, reconnection. Robert seemed genuinely excited about the trip, more engaged than he had been in months. He even took the initiative to make dinner reservations at several Michelin-starred restaurants. I allowed myself to hope that this trip might mark a new chapter in our marriage. 2 weeks before our anniversary, I was preparing for a client meeting when I realized I'd left some files on Robert's laptop. He had left for work already, but he'd forgotten his laptop at home, a rare occurrence that should have been my first clue something was off. With my client expecting those files within the hour, I decided to retrieve them from his computer. I moved the mouse to wake the screen. I noticed an email notification pop up. The sender was Melissa W., and the subject line read, "Can't wait for tonight." A knot formed in my stomach. Robert didn't work with anyone named Melissa, at least. Not that he'd ever mentioned. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But something, intuition perhaps, guided my hand to click on that email. And there it was, in black and white, evidence of my husband's betrayal. "Last night was amazing," the email read. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Tonight, I've booked the usual room. Meet me at 7, love Mel." My hands shook as I clicked through his email, finding dozens of exchanges between Robert and Melissa Wells, his executive assistant for the past year. The emails dated back 6 months, becoming increasingly intimate. There were hotel receipts, suggestive photos, plans for their future. It was all there, meticulously documented in his inbox. I sat motionless at his desk for what felt like hours, the client meeting forgotten. 30 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, with me discovering my husband's affair through a carelessly left open email. The pain was physical, like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it ruptured. I called my client and rescheduled, claiming a family emergency. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I forwarded all the emails to myself, before deleting the forwarded copies from his sent folder. I didn't know why I did it at the time. Perhaps I needed proof, something concrete to hold on to when my world was spinning out of control. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That evening, I confronted Robert. He returned home late, around 9 p.m., smelling of unfamiliar perfume. I was sitting in the dark living room, waiting. "How long have you been sleeping with Melissa?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He froze in the doorway, his expression confirming what I already knew. To his credit, he didn't try to deny it. "Alice," he said, his voice weary, "this isn't how I wanted you to find out." "So you planned to tell me? When? After our anniversary trip?" My voice cracked slightly, betraying my pain. Robert sank into the armchair across from me. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his secrets. "I was going to tell you after the anniversary. I didn't want to ruin the trip." "How considerate," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "How long, Robert?" He sighed, running his hands through his hair, now more gray than the dark brown I'd fallen in love with decades ago. 6 months. But it's not just physical, Alice. I love her. Those words hit me like a physical blow, an affair I might have been able to work through, painful as it would have been. But love? That was something else entirely. "She's 28, I said flatly, "younger than our daughter." "Age is just a number," he said, and I nearly laughed at the cliché. She understands me, Alice. She's excited about the same things I am. She listens when I talk about work. And I don't? I challenged 3 decades of suppressed resentment bubbling to the surface. I raised our children. I managed our home. I built our financial future while you pursue your career. Was that not enough? It's not about enough, he said, his voice gentle, as if he were explaining something complex to a child. We've grown apart. You must have felt it too. When was the last time we really talked? Not about the kids or money or household logistics, but really connected? He wasn't entirely wrong, which made it worse. We had drifted apart, becoming more like roommates than lovers. But I had been trying to bridge that gap, while he had been building a relationship with someone else. I want a divorce, Robert said finally, the words hanging in the air between us. Melissa and I, we want to build a life together. I felt oddly calm as he outlined his plans. He had already consulted a lawyer. He wanted to sell the house and split the proceeds. He would be generous with the settlement. He had it all figured out. His new life with his young girlfriend, free from the constraints of our 3-decade marriage. What he hadn't figured out was the pension. His substantial, carefully cultivated pension that would fund the comfortable retirement he now planned to enjoy with Melissa instead of me. The pension I had managed from day one, maximizing contributions, selecting investments, monitoring performance. The pension that, unbeknownst to Robert, listed me as the irrevocable beneficiary and gave me significant control over distribution upon retirement. You see, 15 years earlier, when Robert had been promoted to executive VP and the pension terms were revised, I had handled all the paperwork. Robert had signed the documents I prepared, including one that granted me, as his spouse, special rights over the pension. Under the specific terms I had selected, and that Robert had endorsed with his signature, any changes to beneficiaries or distribution plans required my written consent as his spouse, even in the event of divorce. It was a protective measure I had implemented to ensure our financial security, never imagining it would become a powerful leverage point in the dissolution of our marriage. Robert, who had happily delegated all financial matters to me for decades, had no idea that his pension, now worth well over $3 million, was effectively under my control. As he outlined his plans for our divorce that night, I said, "Nothing about the pension." I listened, nodded, even agreed to some of his initial proposals. Let him think this would be easy. Let him believe he could discard 3 decades of marriage and waltz off into the sunset with his young secretary, financially unscathed. He moved out the next day, taking only his clothes and personal items. Our anniversary trip to Napa was canceled, the deposits forfeited. Robert took up residence in Melissa's downtown apartment while I remained in our family home, shell-shocked but beginning to formulate a plan. The first call I made was not to a divorce attorney, but to my longtime financial advisor, Thomas. I needed to confirm my understanding of the pension terms before proceeding. Thomas reviewed the documents and confirmed what I already suspected. Robert's pension was indeed subject to the special provisions we had established years ago. "He can't access the full pension without your consent," Thomas explained. "And even after the divorce, unless you explicitly waive your rights, you'll retain significant control over distribution." I felt a grim satisfaction as I thanked Thomas for his confirmation. Then, and only then, did I call a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney, but Catherine Reynolds, known for her fierce advocacy for women in high-asset divorces. I forwarded her the emails I had saved, along with the pension documents and our complete financial records. Our first meeting was 2 days after Robert moved out. Catherine's office was sleek and intimidating, much like the woman herself. She listened attentively as I detailed my marriage, the discovery of the affair, and my knowledge of our financial situation. Most women in your position are at a disadvantage because they've allowed their husbands to control the finances, Catherine said, reviewing the documents I had brought. But you're different, Alice. You hold all the cards. She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye that matched my own emerging resolve. Let's discuss strategy. I think your husband is about to learn a very expensive lesson about loyalty and financial planning. Catherine Reynolds and I spent the next week crafting our approach. Unlike Robert, who was rushing headlong into his new life, we would be methodical and strategic. We decided not to initiate divorce proceedings immediately. Let him file first, Catherine advised. It gives us a psychological advantage. He thinks he's in control, setting the terms. Let him keep thinking that. I agreed with her strategy. So I waited, going through the motions of my daily life while a storm raged inside me. I continued my consulting work, had lunch with friends who knew nothing of my crumbling marriage, and even attended a charity gala alone, telling acquaintances that Robert was away on business. It took Robert exactly 10 days to file for divorce. His attorney, Bradley Thompson, was a corporate lawyer from his firm's legal department, competent in business matters but inexperienced in family law. Their initial proposal was laughably one-sided. Robert would keep his pension and investments intact, while I would receive the house, a modest alimony for 5 years, and a portion of our joint savings. Catherine's response was a masterclass in legal maneuvering. She didn't reveal our trump card immediately. Instead, she countered with demands that appeared excessive, but were designed to prepare the ground. For our eventual strategy, she requested lifetime alimony, 70% of all assets, and complete ownership of our investment portfolio. They'll balk at these terms, she explained, but it sets up the negotiation. When we reveal the pension situation, our actual demands will seem reasonable by comparison. Meanwhile, I maintained minimal contact with Robert. He called occasionally, usually to discuss some practical matter related to the house or our finances. During one such call, he mentioned that he and Melissa were looking at condos downtown. "We want a fresh start," he said, seemingly oblivious to how those words might wound me. "Something modern, with a view of the lake." I bit back the bitter remarks that threatened to spill out and simply acknowledged his plans with a non-committal, "I see." Let him dream a little longer. 3 weeks after the divorce filing, we had our first four-way meeting, Robert and his attorney, along with Catherine and me. We met in a conference room at Catherine's firm, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and professionalism. I wanted Robert to see me not as the discarded wife, but as a formidable opponent. Robert entered the room with Bradley, his expression a mixture of determination and discomfort. He avoided my gaze initially, focusing instead on arranging his papers and whispering to his attorney. He looked older somehow, the weight of his decisions etching new lines around his eyes. Or perhaps I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Catherine opened the meeting with pleasantries before cutting to the chase. "We've reviewed your proposal, and we find it fundamentally unacceptable. It fails to acknowledge Mrs. Mitchell's substantial contributions to the marriage and the family's financial success." Bradley shifted in his seat. "Our proposal is more than generous given Illinois divorce statutes. Mr. Mitchell is offering the family home outright, which is valued at $850,000, plus alimony of $10,000 monthly for 5 years. That's in addition to half of their joint savings of approximately $1.2 million. "What about the pension?" Catherine asked innocently, as if it were merely one item. On a checklist, Robert spoke up for the first time. "My pension remains with me, of course. It's tied to my employment." Catherine smiled, sliding a document across the table. "I think you should review this before we proceed further." The document was the pension agreement Robert had signed 15 years earlier, with the relevant provisions highlighted in bright yellow. Bradley picked it up first, scanning it with increasing concern before passing it to Robert. I watched as Robert's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to anger. He read the highlighted sections twice, his face reddening with each review. "This can't be right," he said finally, looking directly at me for the first time. "You did this deliberately." "I did what any responsible financial manager would do," I replied calmly. "I secured our retirement. The fact that you're now trying to abandon that retirement and me doesn't change the legal reality of the situation." Robert turned to Bradley. "Can she do this? Can she actually block my pension?" Bradley, clearly unprepared for this development, fumbled through non-committal legalese about needing to consult with pension law specialists. But his discomfort was not enough. Catherine took control of the meeting again. "Here's our actual proposal." She slid another document across the table. "Mrs. Mitchell is willing to release her rights over the pension distribution under the following conditions." The conditions were steep, but not unreasonable given the circumstances. 60% of the pension value transferred to my IRA immediately. Lifetime alimony of $8,000 monthly with cost of living adjustments, the house free and clear, and 65% of our combined investment portfolios. "This is highway robbery," Robert sputtered, his composure cracking. "You'd leave me with barely anything to start my new life." "Actually," Catherine countered, "you'd retain 40% of a pension worth over $3 million, plus 35% of investments worth approximately $2 million. That's hardly barely anything, Mr. Mitchell. Many would consider it quite generous under the circumstances." The meeting ended with Robert and Bradley requesting time to consider our proposal. As they gathered their papers to leave, Robert paused beside my chair. "I never thought you'd be vindictive, Alice," he said quietly, his voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. I looked up at him, the man I had loved for 30 years, now a stranger preparing to build a life with someone else. "And I never thought you'd throw away 3 decades of marriage for your secretary. I guess we're both full of surprises." As Robert and Bradley left the conference room, Catherine turned to me with a satisfied smile. "Round 1 to us. They'll counter, of course, but we've established the high ground." Over the next 2 months, negotiations continued. Robert's team brought in a pension law specialist who confirmed what we already knew. The agreement was binding. They explored various legal challenges but found no viable path to circumvent the provisions I had established years earlier. During this period, I received an unexpected call from Melissa Wells. She had obtained my number from Robert's phone and reached out while he was in a business meeting. "Mrs. Mitchell," she began, her voice younger and more hesitant than I had imagined. "I know you probably hate me, but I think we should talk." Curiosity outweighed my initial impulse to hang up. "What could we possibly have to discuss, Ms. Wells?" "Robert isn't being honest with either of us," she said. "I think you deserve to know the whole story." We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, in a neighborhood far from both our homes. I arrived early, securing a corner table that offered privacy. When Melissa walked in, I was struck by how ordinary she looked. Pretty in a conventional way, but not the bombshell homewrecker I had conjured in my imagination. She was dressed conservatively in a pencil skirt and blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Up close, I could see the nervousness in her eyes. "This isn't easy for me." "I imagine not," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You said Robert isn't being honest?" Melissa nodded, fidgeting with her napkin. "When our relationship started, he told me he was essentially separated. He said you and he had an understanding that the marriage was over in everything but name." I wasn't surprised. It was the oldest excuse in the book. "And you believed him?" "I know how it sounds," she said, eyes downcast. "But he was convincing. He said you stayed together for appearances, for the children. but that you both lived separate lives. And now you know that wasn't true, I stated rather than asked. She nodded again. After he moved in with me, after you found out, things changed. He became controlling, checking my phone, questioning where I'd been. Last week, I found emails between him and another woman, Sarah from marketing. They've been meeting for lunch, and the messages were inappropriate. I felt a strange lack of surprise. If Robert had cheated with Melissa, why wouldn't he cheat on her too? Why are you telling me this? Melissa looked up, her eyes suddenly clearer, more resolved. Because I'm ending it with him, and I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly didn't understand what I was walking into, and I think you should know about Sarah, for the divorce proceedings. She slid a folder across the table, printouts of emails between Robert and this Sarah person, dating back several weeks. They weren't as explicit as the ones I had discovered between him and Melissa, but the pattern was unmistakable. Robert was already laying groundwork for his next conquest. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciating her honesty despite everything. What will you do now? I've already applied for transfers to other departments. I can't keep working directly with him, she said, and I'm moving out this weekend while he's at a conference in Denver. I've found a studio apartment I can afford on my own. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Melissa hesitated, then offered a final thought. He talks about the pension all the time, you know. It's become an obsession. He blamed me initially, saying if I hadn't rushed him, he could have handled things differently with you. Now he blames you, calling you calculating and vengeful. I smiled thinly. And what do you think? I think, she said carefully, that he underestimated you. And I'm glad someone is finally holding him accountable. The information Melissa provided proved invaluable in our negotiations. Catherine advised against using the Sarah emails immediately, preferring to hold them in reserve as leverage if needed. But knowing about this new development strengthened my resolve to secure the best possible settlement. Robert's counter-proposal arrived a week later. 50% of the pension, the house with a $200,000 buyout to him, and a significantly reduced alimony package. Catherine and I discussed it thoroughly before crafting our response. He's moving closer to our position, she observed. But we can do better. Our counter offered 55% of the pension to me, the house free and clear, and alimony at $7,000 monthly for 15 years. We also included a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent either party from discussing the details of our divorce or marriage with future partners or employers. The negotiations might have continued in this vein for months, but two events accelerated the process. First, Robert's company announced a restructuring that put his position at risk. Second, Emma, our daughter, called to tell me she was pregnant with our first grandchild. The company restructuring sent Robert into panic mode. If he lost his job, the unvested portion of his pension would be at risk. Suddenly, securing what he could from our divorce became more urgent. And the news of Emma's pregnancy shifted something in me. I wanted this chapter of my life closed before welcoming a new generation into our family. Catherine and I adjusted our strategy in light of these developments. We offered Robert a clean final deal, 55% of the pension to me, immediate and irrevocable, the house to me without any buyout, alimony of $6,500 monthly for 10 years, and a 60-40 split of remaining assets in my favor. In exchange, I would release all other claims and agree to a swift, uncontested divorce. To our surprise, Robert accepted almost immediately. His attorney called Catherine the day after receiving our proposal. Mr. Mitchell wants to conclude this matter as expeditiously as possible, Bradley explained. He accepts your terms with one condition. The divorce must be finalized within 30 days. We agreed. The paperwork was prepared, the pension transfer arrangements made, and a court date set. Throughout this process, I had minimal contact with Robert. Our interactions were limited to necessary signatures and brief, formal exchanges through our attorneys. The day before our court appearance, I received a text from Robert asking to meet for coffee. I hesitated, unsure if there was anything left to say between us. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a Starbucks halfway between our old home and Melissa's apartment. I arrived to find Robert already seated at a corner table, 2 coffees in front of him. He had remembered my order, a simple black coffee, no sugar. This small gesture, this tiny remnant of intimacy, nearly undid my composure. But I steadied myself as I took the seat across from him. He looked tired, the confident executive demeanor replaced by something more subdued. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I wanted to see you before tomorrow, to clear the air." "The air between us requires more than a conversation to clear," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "I know." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture from a man who now seemed like a stranger. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how things ended. Not for the divorce itself, but for the way it happened. You deserved better." I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Are you apologizing because you mean it, or because you lost the upper hand in the negotiations?" He winced, but nodded in acknowledgement of the fair hit. "Both, probably. I underestimated you, Alice. I always knew you were smart, but I never realized just how formidable you could be. You never really saw me," I said quietly. "Not completely. You saw the parts of me that were convenient for you, the supportive wife, the capable mother, the financial manager who made your life easier. But you missed the woman beneath all those roles." Robert was silent for a moment, absorbing my words. "You may be right," he finally admitted. "And for what it's worth, Melissa and I are done. She moved out last weekend." I thought about mentioning Sarah from marketing but decided against it. Let him believe his secrets were still his own. "I heard," I said simply. He looked surprised. "How?" "It's a small world, Robert," I replied, deliberately vague. "What will you do now? With the restructuring at Hartwell, I mean." His expression clouded. "I've been offered a position with their Phoenix office. Lower level, lower pay, but at least I'd keep my job and the remaining pension." "Phoenix?" I echoed. "That's quite a change." "A fresh start," he said, echoing the words he had used when describing the condo he'd planned to buy with Melissa. "I think I need that now." We talked a bit longer, about practical matters mostly. What to tell friends, how to handle family gatherings when Emma's baby arrived, the logistics of fully separating our lives after 30 years of integration. It was civilized, almost friendly, but underscored by an unavoidable awareness of all that had been lost. As we prepared to leave, Robert hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind throughout our conversation. "Did you plan this all along? The pension arrangement, I mean. Was it some kind of insurance policy?" I considered my answer carefully. "I planned for our future, Robert, for our retirement, our security. That it became leverage in our divorce was never the intention. But perhaps it was karma. You broke a promise you made 30 years ago. I simply enforced one you made 15 years ago." He nodded slowly, accepting this. "You always were the smarter one," he said, a ghost of his old, affectionate smile crossing his face. "I should have remembered that before I crossed you." We parted ways outside the coffee shop, our goodbye as undramatic as our meeting had been. No tears, no recriminations, just the quiet acknowledgement of an ending. The divorce was finalized. The next day in a sterile courtroom, 30 years of marriage dissolved in a 20-minute proceeding. I walked out of the courthouse with my future secured, financially at least. The emotional landscape was still uncertain, still raw, but I had survived the worst of it. That evening, alone in the house that was now unequivocally mine, I opened a bottle of the champagne we had been saving for our anniversary trip to Napa. I poured a single glass and stood by the kitchen window, gazing out at the garden Robert and I had planted together decades earlier. I thought about the life we had built, the children we had raised, the memories accumulated over 30 years of partnership. And I thought about the road ahead, different than I had imagined, but still mine to shape. There was pain in this ending, yes, but also possibility. I had proven myself stronger than I knew, more capable than even I had believed. The pension that Robert had tried to take with him into his new life would now fund a future he had never anticipated. My future, independent of him. In the corporate world he loved so much, they would call it poetic justice. In my world, it was simply the beginning of a new chapter, written on my terms. I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to the past, but to whatever came next. 6 months. After the divorce was finalized, I stood in a hospital room in Rochester, Minnesota, holding my newborn grandson, James Robert Hayes, in my arms. Emma watched from her bed, exhausted but radiant. Her husband, Daniel, hovered nearby, his expression a mixture of pride and terror that seems universal among new fathers. "He has your eyes, Mom," Emma said softly. "That Mitchell green." I studied the tiny face, searching for traces of our family. "He's perfect," I whispered, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. This new life represented continuity, hope, a future extending beyond my own. As I cradled James, I reflected on how much had changed since the divorce. Robert had indeed moved to Phoenix, taking the demoted position with Hartwell Industries. We communicated occasionally, brief, polite exchanges about our children or logistical matters. He had sent flowers to Emma upon hearing of James's birth but declined her invitation to visit, citing work commitments. I suspected he was simply avoiding me. My own life had entered a period of reinvention. With the financial security provided by the divorce settlement, I had the freedom to pursue interests long set aside. I expanded my consulting business, focusing on financial planning for women in transition, divorcees, widows, career changers. My experience had given me insight and empathy that clients responded to, and word-of-mouth referrals quickly filled my calendar. I had also sold the Colonial in Evanston, unable to find comfort in spaces so laden with memories. Instead, I purchased a modern condominium overlooking Lake Michigan, its clean lines and open floor plans symbolizing my fresh start. The decor was entirely my own choosing, no compromises, no deference to another's taste. Every piece reflected some aspect of myself, from the abstract paintings by local artists to the sleek, comfortable furniture that prioritized function over formality. "Have you heard from Dad?" Emma asked, interrupting my reverie. She had been careful not to take sides in the divorce, maintaining relationships with both her father and me despite the circumstances. "Not recently," I replied, gently rocking James. "The last I heard, he was settling into Phoenix." Emma nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "He sounds different when we talk. Subdued." Michael says the same thing. I felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt, but a complex emotion that defied simple categorization. Robert had made his choices, and I had protected myself. Yet I took no pleasure in his apparent unhappiness. "He's adjusting to a lot of changes," I said neutrally. "New city, new position, new circumstances." "Mom," Emma began hesitantly, "I know what Dad did was terrible, but sometimes I worry that the settlement was too harsh. That pension was everything to him." I passed James back to her, choosing my words carefully. "Your father still has 45% of a very substantial pension, Emma. Enough for a comfortable life. What happened wasn't punishment, it was consequence." She nodded, not entirely convinced but unwilling to press further. The moment was saved by Daniel's announcement that Michael had arrived, having flown in from Boston for the occasion. My son entered the room, bringing with him the boundless energy that had characterized him since childhood. At 26, Michael was the spitting image of his father, tall, with the same strong jawline and confident bearing. But his temperament was all his own, a unique blend of analytical brilliance and emotional intelligence. "Let me see my nephew," he exclaimed, peering down at the bundle in Emma's arms. "Wow, he's tiny and kind of wrinkly. Is that normal?" Emma laughed, the tension in the room dissipating. "Yes, genius. That's completely normal for newborns." Michael grinned, then turned to hug me. "How are you doing, Mom? The new place treating you well?" "I'm good," I assured him. Better than good. Actually, it was true. Despite the upheaval of the past year, I had landed on my feet. More than that, I had discovered aspects of myself long overshadowed by marriage and motherhood. A resilience, a capacity for joy independent of others, a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. The next few days were a bubble of family time, centered around the newest Mitchell, technically Hayes, but we all considered him a Mitchell by blood. We established a gentle routine around Emma's recovery and James's feeding schedule. I cooked, Daniel handled laundry, and Michael became surprisingly adept at diaper changes, approaching them with the same methodical precision he applied to coding. During quiet moments, while Emma and the baby napped, I had longer conversations with Michael. Unlike his sister, he had been openly angry with Robert, barely speaking to his father in the months following the divorce revelation. "Have you talked to Dad recently?" I asked as we sat on the small balcony of Emma's apartment, mugs of coffee warming our hands against the Minnesota chill. Michael shrugged, his expression hardening slightly. "We had a video call last month. It was strained." "He's still your father," I said gently. "Whatever happened between us doesn't change that." "It changes everything," Michael countered, his voice tight. "He threw away our family for a fling with someone younger than me. He lied, cheated, planned to leave you financially vulnerable after 30 years of marriage. How am I supposed to respect someone who does that?" I sighed, understanding his anger but concerned about its intensity. "People make mistakes, Michael. Even terrible ones. Holding on to that anger only hurts you in the long run." He looked at me with genuine confusion. "How are you not angry? He betrayed you in the worst possible way." It was a fair question, one I had asked myself many times over the past year. The truth was complex, layered with emotions that had evolved as time passed. I was angry, I admitted. Furious, devastated, all of it. But anger is exhausting to maintain. And ultimately, your father's choices revealed more about him than they did about me or my worth. I paused, gathering thoughts that had been forming gradually since the divorce. The greatest gift of this whole painful experience has been rediscovering myself, not as Robert's wife or just your and Emma's mother, but as Alice. Just Alice. And it turns out I like her quite a bit. Michael's expression softened, a small smile forming. "I like her too," he said. "You seem lighter somehow, more yourself." "Exactly," I agreed. "So no, I'm not angry anymore. Disappointed sometimes, sad occasionally, but mostly just focused on this new chapter." As I prepared to return to Chicago after a week with Emma and the baby, I received an unexpected message from Robert. It was short, almost terse. "Need to discuss something important. Can we talk when you're back from Rochester?" Curiosity piqued. I agreed to a phone call the day after my return. I settled into my condo, unpacked, and tried not to speculate too much about what Robert might want to discuss. Our communication had been minimal since the divorce, limited to necessary exchanges about taxes or family events. When the phone rang the following evening, I felt an odd flutter of nerves before answering. "Hello, Robert." "Alice," he said, his voice sounding thin and distant through the connection. "Thanks for agreeing to talk." "Of course. What's on your mind? He cleared his throat, a familiar prelude to difficult conversations throughout our marriage. I've had some health issues recently. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that I've had to reevaluate some things. Concern immediately overrode any lingering resentment. What kind of health issues? Have you told the children? Heart problems, he said simply. A minor attack 3 weeks ago, followed by some concerning test results. I need bypass surgery. And no, I haven't told Emma or Michael yet. I didn't want to worry Emma with the baby, and Michael, he trailed off, the strained relationship with our son hovering unspoken between us. You need to tell them, I said firmly. They deserve to know, regardless of any tension. I will, he promised. But there's something else I wanted to discuss. With you first. Here it comes, I thought. Some financial request, perhaps. The medical bills would be substantial, even with insurance. I'm coming back to Chicago, he said, surprising me. The Phoenix position isn't working out, and my doctors recommended I have the surgery at Northwestern Memorial, where my cardiac history is already on record. Hartwell has agreed to let me work remotely during recovery, and then... He paused, seeming to gather courage. And then I'm retiring. Earlier than planned, obviously, but the doctors are insistent that I reduce stress. I see, I said, processing this information. And you're telling me this because I'll need to access more of the pension to cover medical expenses, not covered by insurance, he said. According to the terms we established, any change in distribution still requires your consent. There it was. The financial angle I had anticipated. How much are you looking to access? About $200,000, he replied. I've run the numbers, and that should cover everything while leaving the bulk of the pension intact. I considered his request. Under the divorce terms, he couldn't touch the pension principal without my written consent. His 45% was being distributed as monthly income, protecting it from being depleted all at once. The arrangement had been designed to ensure his long-term security, and to prevent him from spending lavishly on a new life with Melissa or whoever came after her. Where will you live in Chicago? I asked, changing the subject slightly. He sighed. I haven't figured that out yet. The real estate market in Phoenix is difficult right now, so selling my place there will take time. I might need to rent initially. An idea formed in my mind, unexpected, perhaps unwise, but somehow right. The guest house, I said. What? The guest house at Michael's, I clarified. He bought that Victorian in Lincoln Park last year, remember? It has a carriage house in back that he was planning to rent out, but hasn't gotten around to it. It would be close to Northwestern Memorial for your appointments. There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of Robert's breathing. You think Michael would agree to that? He barely speaks to me these days. I think, I said carefully, that your son loves you despite everything, and that having you close during your recovery would ease his mind, even if he wouldn't admit it. Another pause. And you'd be okay with this arrangement? With me being back in Chicago in the family orbit again? It was a good question. 6 months ago, the thought of Robert returning would have filled me with dread and anger. But now, I felt a surprising equanimity about the prospect. I'm not the same woman you left, Robert, I said finally. I've built a life that doesn't revolve around you, positively or negatively. If you're coming back for health reasons, if you truly need this for your well-being, then yes, I can be okay with it. We spoke for nearly an hour, ironing out details both practical and emotional. I agreed to speak with Michael about the carriage house. Robert agreed to call both children the following day to explain his health situation. And I promised to review the pension modification with my financial advisor, with a tentative agreement to approve the withdrawal for medical expenses, provided proper documentation. After hanging up, I stood at my living room window, watching the moonlight play across Lake Michigan. The conversation had left me pensive, contemplating the strange turns life could take. A year ago, Robert had been prepared to discard me from his life entirely. Now, circumstances had created a scenario where I was potentially facilitating his return to Chicago, even helping arrange his housing. But it wasn't weakness or desperation driving my decisions. It was the opposite, a strength born of self-sufficiency, a confidence in my own boundaries. I could afford to be generous precisely because I no longer needed anything from him. The next month brought swift changes. Michael, after initial resistance, agreed to rent the carriage house to his father. But if he brings some 20-something girlfriend around, all bets are off, he warned, only half joking. Emma was openly relieved about the arrangement, especially with her plans to bring baby James to Chicago for an extended visit over the summer. Having both her parents in the same city, even if no longer together, provided a sense of stability she craved as a new mother. Robert's surgery was scheduled for early April. In a gesture that surprised everyone, including myself, I offered to drive him to the hospital and serve as his emergency contact. His friends in Chicago were mostly couples we had socialized with during our marriage, many of whom had drifted away from him after the divorce. And he had no family in the area aside from Michael, who had work commitments that day. "You don't have to do this," Robert said when I arrived at Michael's carriage house the morning of surgery. He looked vulnerable in a way I had rarely seen during our marriage. Thinner, grayer, the confident executive persona stripped away by illness and circumstance. "I know I don't have to," I replied, helping him with his overnight bag. "But I think it's the right thing to do." The drive to Northwestern Memorial was quiet, both of us lost in private thoughts. As we approached the hospital, Robert broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about karma lately," he said, staring out the passenger window. "About choices and consequences. When I chose to leave our marriage the way I did, I never imagined ending up here, alone, sick, dependent, on the kindness of the very person I hurt most." I kept my eyes on the road, unsure how to respond. After a moment, he continued. "I thought I was entitled to happiness at any cost, that I had somehow been shortchanged by staying in a marriage that had become comfortable rather than exciting. But the truth is, I was greedy. I wanted the future we had built together and the thrill of starting over with someone new." We pulled into the hospital parking structure, and I found a spot near the elevator. Turning off the engine, I finally looked at him directly. "Why are you telling me this now, Robert?" He met my gaze, his eyes clearer and more direct than they had been in years. "Because facing mortality has a way of clarifying what matters. And because I owe you an authentic apology, not the half-hearted one I offered before, which was more about managing the divorce than truly acknowledging what I had done." I nodded, accepting this. "Thank you. That means something." As we walked through the hospital corridors toward the cardiac unit, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you seeing anyone? Dating, I mean." I laughed softly, surprised by the sudden shift. "That's a very personal question from my ex-husband. On the way to his heart surgery." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "You're right, I'm sorry. It's none of my business." "No, it's not," I agreed. "But if you must know, I've had a few dinners with a widower who serves on the library board with me. Martin Abernathy. He's a retired professor of architectural history. Very different from you." Robert processed this information, his expression unreadable. "Is it serious?" "It's pleasant," I replied simply. "And that's enough for now." We reached the surgical check-in, where a nurse took Robert's information and directed us to a waiting area. As he filled out forms, I found myself studying his profile, so familiar yet somehow belonging to a different life. We had spent 30 years together, built a family, shared a home, and now we were polite strangers navigating an unexpected moment of intimacy amidst the sterile environment of a hospital. When they came to take him for pre-op procedures, Robert reached for my hand impulsively. "Thank you, Alice." for being here, for handling the pension adjustment, for everything. I squeezed his hand briefly before releasing it. You're still family, Robert. That didn't change, even when everything else did. The surgery lasted 5 hours. I sat in the waiting room, alternating between reading a novel I had brought and updating Michael and Emma via text. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression was reassuring. The procedure went well, he told me. We completed a triple bypass. He'll need time to recover, but the prognosis is good. Relief washed over me. Not the desperate relief of a woman fearing for her husband's life, but the gentler relief of someone who wishes no, I'll even upon those who have caused pain. I stayed until Robert was settled in recovery, briefly speaking. With him once he was alert enough for visitors. His voice was hoarse, his manner subdued by medication, but his gratitude was evident. They said everything went well, I assured him. Michael is coming by after work. Emma sends her love from Minnesota. He nodded weakly. And you? Will you come back tomorrow? I considered his question, weighing obligations and boundaries. Yes, I decided. I'll check in tomorrow afternoon. As I prepared to leave, he caught my wrist with surprising strength, for someone just out of major surgery. I lost more than I knew when I lost you, Alice. The statement hung in the air between us, weighted with regret and a question he didn't quite articulate. I gently extricated my wrist from his grasp. Rest, Robert. Focus on healing now. Everything else is just part of the journey we're both on. Walking to my car in the fading evening light, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Not the neat, packaged resolution of fiction, but the messy, complicated peace that comes from accepting what is while honoring what was. The pension that had become a weapon in our divorce was now being partially redirected to save Robert's life. The man who had once abandoned me was now dependent on my goodwill. And I, who had once defined myself primarily as Robert Mitchell's wife, was now standing firmly in my own identity, an identity that could encompass compassion without surrendering, autonomy. Life, I reflected as I drove back to my lakefront condo, rarely follows the scripts we write for it. The vindication I had once craved had been delivered, but it tasted different than I had imagined. Less sweet, more complex. And perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of this entire ordeal, that true power lies not in revenge or control, but in the freedom to choose compassion when bitterness would be equally justified. As I watched the Chicago skyline come into view, my city, my home, now unequivocally mine, I smiled at the irony of it all. Robert had left me for a younger woman and a fresh start, only to end up alone and returning to the life he had discarded. I had been left behind, only to discover I had always been my own destination. The pension that he had built and I had protected would continue to support us both, differently than planned, but fittingly nonetheless. In the complex ledger of our shared history, perhaps that represented the truest form of justice. Not the destruction of the other, but the recalibration of what each of us truly deserved. 3 months after Robert's surgery, summer arrived in Chicago with its characteristic humidity and vibrant energy. The city transformed as it always did. Parks filled with families, Lake Michigan dotted with sailboats, and outdoor cafes bustling with activity. This particular summer felt different to me, marked by new routines and unexpected connections. Emma had arrived from Rochester with baby James for a 6-week stay, temporarily moving into my guest bedroom while Daniel remained in Minnesota, flying in for weekends when possible. Having my daughter and grandson in my home brought a joy I hadn't anticipated when purchasing the condo, a space I had chosen primarily for myself, now filled with the chaos and delight of family. "This view is incredible, Mom," Emma said one evening as we sat on my balcony, James asleep in his portable bassinet between us. The sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and pink, the city skyline gradually illuminating as dusk settled. "No wonder you never want to leave." I smiled, savoring my glass of Pinot Noir. "It's quite different from the backyard in Evanston, isn't it?" "I loved that backyard," Emma said wistfully. "The swing set, the garden, the treehouse Dad built for Michael." "I loved it too," I admitted. "But this," I gestured toward the expansive view, "this represents something new, something that's entirely mine." Emma studied me thoughtfully. "You've changed so much this past year. In good ways," she added quickly. "You seem more... I don't know, vibrant somehow. More yourself." "Divorce will do that," I quipped, but then grew more serious. "Actually, it's not so much the divorce itself as what came after. The rediscovery of who I am when I'm not defining myself through someone else's expectations." Our conversation drifted to Robert's recovery. He had been diligent about his rehabilitation, attending cardiac therapy sessions 3 times weekly, and adhering to the dietary restrictions his doctors had imposed. Michael reported that his father was a model tenant in the carriage house, quiet, respectful of boundaries, and fastidious about maintaining the space. "I'm having dinner with your father tomorrow," I mentioned casually, refilling my glass. "He wants to discuss some pension adjustments now that his medical expenses are clearer." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Just a financial discussion?" I gave her a pointed look. "Yes, just financially. Don't read more into it than there is." "I'm not," she protested, though her expression suggested otherwise. "It's just, you seem to have forgiven him. I wasn't sure that would ever happen." I considered her observation, trying to articulate the complex evolution of my feelings. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Emma. It's a process, one that happens in stages and sometimes surprises you. I haven't forgotten what he did, but I've decided not to let it define me, or him, forever." The following evening, I met Robert at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, halfway between my condo and Michael's carriage house. He had chosen the venue, a quiet, family-owned establishment far from the upscale restaurants we had frequented during our marriage. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, dressed in a casual button-down shirt that hung somewhat loosely on his still-recovering frame. "You look well," he said, as I took my seat, his eyes taking in my appearance with appreciation. I had dressed with care in a seafoam green summer dress that complemented my eyes, not for Robert's benefit, but because I had plans to meet Martin for a late concert after our dinner. "Thank you," I replied, unfolding my napkin. "The recovery seems to be progressing?" He nodded, unconsciously touching his chest where the surgical scars lay beneath his shirt. "Better than expected. The doctors are pleased. Another month of cardiac rehab and I should be cleared for more normal activities." We ordered a caprese salad and grilled branzino for me, pasta with a light marinara for him as per his new dietary restrictions. As the waiter departed, Robert retrieved a folder from the briefcase beside his chair. "I've been working with a financial advisor," he began, opening the folder to reveal neatly organized spreadsheets. "The medical expenses were lower than anticipated, thanks to secondary insurance coverage I'd forgotten about. I've calculated exactly what I'll need from the pension to cover the remaining expenses." I glanced at the figures, impressed by his thoroughness. The Robert I had been married to would have delegated such details to me, claiming incompetence with financial minutiae. This new attention to his own financial management represented yet another shift in our post-divorce dynamic. "This looks reasonable," I said, reviewing the numbers. "I'll have Catherine draw up the necessary paperwork for the adjusted withdrawal. It should be completed within the week." "Thank you," he said, genuine relief evident in his voice. "I know you have no obligation to accommodate these changes." "It's your pension too, Robert," I reminded him. "The arrangement was never meant to punish you, only to protect what we had both worked for." Our meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, Robert cautiously steered the discussion toward more personal matters. Emma mentioned you're seeing someone, he said, attempting nonchalance. A professor, she said? I took a sip of my water, deciding how much to share. Martin Abernathy, retired from the University of Chicago. We've been seeing each other for about 4 months. Is it serious? Robert asked the same question he had posed before his surgery. It's evolving, I replied honestly. Martin is thoughtful, kind. He reads poetry and knows the history of every building in Chicago. He makes me laugh. Robert absorbed this, his expression carefully neutral. He sounds nothing like me. That's not incidental, I acknowledged with a small smile. He laughed softly, conceding the point. Fair enough. And what does Professor Abernathy think about you having dinner with your ex-husband? Martin doesn't think anything about it because it's not relevant to our relationship, I said firmly. He knows my history and he respects my autonomy. Besides, he's having dinner with his daughter this evening. Robert nodded, then hesitated before venturing onto even more personal territory. And you've told him everything? About how our marriage ended? The pension situation? Not the details of the pension, I said. That remains between us. But yes, he knows the broad strokes of how and why we divorced. And he doesn't judge you for how you handled it? Using the pension as leverage? I set down my fork, studying Robert with newfound clarity. Is that what you think happened? That I used the pension vindictively? Didn't you? He countered, though his tone held more curiosity than accusation. No, I said firmly. I protected what was legally and ethically mine after 30 years of marriage. There's a difference. Robert considered this distinction, absently twirling pasta around his fork. I suppose perspective changes depending on which side of the equation you're on. True, I acknowledged, but consider this perspective. I could have fought for more. I could have exposed your second affair, with Sarah from marketing, during the proceedings. His fork clattered against his plate, eyes widening in shock. How did you know about Sarah? I finished for him. Melissa told me. She found your emails, just as I had found hers. She gave me copies before ending things with you. Robert paled visibly, the remaining color draining from his face. You knew during the negotiations? And you didn't use it? I held it in reserve, I admitted. Catherine wanted to deploy it if necessary, but ultimately it wasn't needed. You agreed to terms that were fair without that extra pressure. Silence settled between us as Robert processed this revelation. Finally, he asked, Why are you telling me this now? I considered the question, searching for the most honest answer. Because I want you to understand that what happened wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice and self-preservation. I had the means to truly destroy you, Robert, financially and reputationally. I chose not to. Our dinner concluded with a new understanding between us. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect that had been absent at the end of our marriage and through much of the divorce. As we walked out of the restaurant, Robert paused on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. I misjudged you for years, he said quietly. I saw your practicality as coldness, your financial acumen as merely useful rather than impressive. I failed to appreciate the woman I had married, truly appreciate her, until she was using those same qualities to secure her future against me. I wasn't sure how to respond to this belated recognition, so I simply nodded in acknowledgement. Emma tells me you're expanding your consulting business, he continued, focusing on financial planning for women in transition. Yes, I confirmed, surprised by his interest. It started small, but it's growing steadily. Word of mouth has been my best marketing tool. You should consider writing a book, he suggested unexpectedly. Your experience, both professional and personal, would be valuable to others. Financial empowerment after divorce, or something similar. The suggestion caught me off guard. A book? I've never thought of myself as a writer. You've always been articulate and insightful, Robert said, and your story, our story, has elements that many would find instructive. As we prepared to part ways, Robert hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider having dinner again sometime? Not to discuss finances or the past, just as people who once meant everything to each other and still share children and now a grandchild." Considered his request, weighing the potential complications against the possible benefits of a more amicable relationship. "Perhaps," I said finally, "but with clear boundaries and expectations." He accepted this conditional response with a nod, understanding its significance. As I hailed a taxi to take me to meet Martin at the concert venue, Robert called after me, "Alice?" I turned back, one hand on the taxi door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything after the surgery, for your kindness when cruelty would have been justified." I offered a small smile in return. "Take care of yourself, Robert. I mean that sincerely." The taxi ride to Millennium Park gave me time to reflect on our conversation and the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A year and a half ago, I had been a devoted wife, believing my marriage would carry me into retirement. Now, I was a financially independent woman with a growing business, a new relationship, and an evolving understanding of my own capacity for both strength and compassion. Martin was waiting at the entrance to the concert pavilion, his tall figure easy to spot in the evening crowd. At 63, he cut a distinguished figure with his salt and pepper beard and wire-rimmed glasses. His face brightened when he saw me approach. "There you are," he said warmly, bending to kiss my cheek. "How was your dinner meeting?" "Surprisingly productive," I replied, tucking my arm through his as we entered the venue. "Both financially and personally." Martin's eyebrows rose slightly. "That sounds intriguing? Care to elaborate?" As we found our seats for the chamber music performance, I gave him a condensed version of my dinner with Robert, including the unexpected book suggestion. "A book," Martin mused, considering the idea with academic interest. He might be onto something there. Your perspective could be quite valuable, particularly for women who have deferred financial engagement during their marriages. "Perhaps," I conceded, not dismissing the concept outright. "But that would be a project for another day. Tonight, I just want to enjoy the music and the company." Martin smiled, covering my hand with his. A sentiment I wholeheartedly endorse. As the orchestra began tuning their instruments, I found myself contemplating the unlikely seeds of growth that had emerged from what had initially seemed like devastation. The pension that Robert had tried to claim exclusively for his new life had not only secured my financial future, but had also catalyzed a professional renaissance I hadn't anticipated. The betrayal that had ended my marriage had indirectly led me to Martin, a relationship fundamentally different from and healthier than what Robert and I had shared in our final years together. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways over the following months. Emma returned to Minnesota with baby James, but made plans to visit more frequently than she had initially anticipated. Michael began dating a software engineer he had met through work, bringing her to family dinners where Robert was sometimes included as his health improved. My consulting business expanded to the point where I had to hire an assistant to manage the increasing client load. Inspired by Robert's suggestion and encouraged by Martin, I began outlining a book on financial empowerment for women, drawing on both my professional expertise and personal experience. Robert's recovery progressed well, and by fall, he had accepted a part-time consulting role with a firm in Chicago, a position that utilized his extensive industry knowledge without the stress of his previous executive responsibilities. He remained in Michael's carriage house, the temporary arrangement evolving into something more permanent as both father and son discovered they valued the proximity while maintaining separate spaces. In October, Robert and I met for coffee at a small cafe near the lake. The autumn air was crisp, leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson in the park across the street. We had established a cautious routine of occasional meetings, not quite friendship, but a cordial relationship that acknowledged our shared history and ongoing connection through our children and grandson. "I signed the final paperwork yesterday," Robert said, stirring his decaf coffee. "Official retirement from Hartwell as of January 1st. "How does that feel?" I asked, genuinely curious about his mindset at this transition point. He considered the question, gazing out at the park where joggers circled the path and children played on swings. "Liberating," he said finally. "I defined myself through that career for so long, pursued advancement with single-minded focus. But now, I find I don't miss it. The consulting work is enough, using my knowledge without the politics and pressure." "That's a healthy perspective," I observed. "Not everyone navigates that transition so gracefully." "Well, having a cardiac event tends to clarify priorities rather efficiently," he said with wry humor. "That, and losing your marriage of 30 years due to monumentally poor judgment." I acknowledged this unusually direct reference to his affair with a slight nod. We rarely discussed that aspect of our shared past, focusing instead on present practicalities and family matters. "The pension begins full distribution in February," I noted, changing the subject slightly. "The financial advisor confirmed everything is proceeding as planned with the revised allocations." Robert nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Have you decided what you'll do with your portion? Any big plans for your share?" I smiled, appreciating the irony of Robert asking me about my financial plans after decades of him deferring completely to my management. "Some will fund my regular expenses, of course. A portion is earmarked for James's education and any future grandchildren. And I've decided to establish a foundation." "A foundation?" Robert echoed, clearly surprised. "What kind?" "A nonprofit, focused on financial literacy for women going through major life transitions," I explained, warming to the topic that had increasingly occupied my thoughts. Divorce, widowhood, career changes, retirement planning, providing education, resources, and individualized coaching that many women wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. Robert's expression softened with something like admiration. "That's remarkably fitting. Using proceeds from a pension that nearly became a weapon in our divorce to help other women avoid similar vulnerabilities." "Life rarely moves in straight lines," I observed. "Sometimes the most painful detours lead to unexpectedly meaningful destinations." As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Robert mentioned that Emma had invited him to Thanksgiving in Minnesota. "She wants the whole family there for James's first Thanksgiving," he explained. "You, me, Michael. She mentioned you might be bringing Martin?" "Yes, if that's not uncomfortable for you," I confirmed, watching his reaction carefully. Robert considered this, then shrugged with surprising equanimity. "Family gatherings will eventually include new partners on both sides. We might as well establish the precedent now, while James is too young to sense any tension." I nodded, appreciating his maturity on the matter. "And what about you? Are you seeing anyone?" He shook his head, a rueful smile crossing his features. "Not currently. I've had a few dinners with a woman I met through my cardiac rehab group, but nothing significant. I think I need more time to figure out who Robert Mitchell is outside of his career and marriage before involving someone else in the equation." This self-awareness represented perhaps the most profound change in the man I had been married to for 30 years. The Robert who had pursued Melissa had been running from himself as much as from our marriage, seeking external validation rather than internal coherence. As we walked together toward the street where we would head in opposite directions, me to my condo, him to Michael's carriage house, Robert paused, turning to face me fully. "Something occurred to me recently," he said, his expression thoughtful. When I tried to claim the pension exclusively for my new life with Melissa, I thought I was entitled to it because I had earned it through my career, my position. He shook his head slowly, recognition dawning anew in his eyes. But what I never acknowledged was how your management made that pension what it was. Your insistence on maximizing contributions when I wanted to buy luxury cars instead. Your investment, selections that consistently outperformed market averages. Your foresight in establishing those protective provisions. I stood quietly, allowing him this moment of realization without interruption. The pension that I tried to take from you was as much your creation as mine, he concluded. Perhaps more so. And the fact that it now supports us both, in ways neither of us anticipated, seems like the most appropriate outcome possible. With that observation, we parted ways. Not as embittered ex-spouses, or even as friendly former partners, but as two people who had traveled a difficult road together and separately, arriving at a destination neither had mapped, but both could accept with hard-won wisdom. Walking back to my condo along the lakefront path, I reflected on the strange symmetry of it all. The pension that Robert had tried to claim for his new beginning was now funding both our fresh starts. His in a scaled-down, health-conscious life focused on family connections, mine in an expanding professional role that synthesized my experiences into service for others. The revenge I had initially craved had been delivered by life itself, in its own time and fashion. And the liberation I hadn't known to seek had arrived in the aftermath, a phoenix rising from the ashes of what had once seemed like devastation, but ultimately proved to be merely transformation. 2 years had passed since my divorce from Robert when an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. The sender's name, Melissa Wells, caused me to pause before opening it. Our single cafe meeting during the divorce proceedings had been our only direct interaction, and I had assumed it would remain that way permanently. The message was brief, but intriguing. I'm in Chicago for a conference next week and wondered if you might be willing to meet. There's something I'd like to discuss that might interest you professionally. Regards, Melissa. My curiosity piqued. I responded with a suggestion to meet at a rooftop restaurant near my office. Whatever Melissa wanted to discuss, I preferred the meeting take place on neutral ground, with a time constraint built in. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a view of both the entrance and the Chicago skyline. I had dressed professionally in a charcoal pantsuit with a silk blouse, an outfit that projected confidence without ostentation. When Melissa entered, I barely recognized her. The nervous young woman from our cafe meeting had been replaced by someone with a more assured bearing. Her blonde hair was now cut in a sleek bob, and she wore a tailored navy dress that suggested career advancement. Alice, she greeted me, extending her hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Your email was intriguing, I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. Though I must admit, I'm curious why you wanted to see me after all this time. Melissa ordered an iced tea, and we engaged in brief small talk about the spring weather and the conference that had brought her to Chicago. She had left Hartwell Industries shortly after ending her relationship with Robert, securing a position with a competitor in Indianapolis. Her new role involved financial communications, a lateral move initially, but one that had led to a promotion within 18 months. I've been following your work, she said finally, transitioning to the purpose of our meeting. The financial, empowerment workshops you've been conducting, the articles you've published, my company's Women's Leadership Initiative has taken notice. This was unexpected. While my consulting practice had grown and my workshop series had gained traction in the Chicago area, I hadn't realized the reach extended to corporate women's programs in other cities. I'm heading our mentorship program now, Melissa continued, and we're looking to bring in speakers who can address financial independence and literacy specifically for women in various life stages. Your perspective is uniquely valuable. I studied her carefully, searching for any undercurrent of discomfort or ulterior motive. Finding none, I asked directly, "Why me, Melissa? Given our history, there must be dozens of other financial advisors you could approach." She didn't flinch from the question. "Because you lived it," she replied simply. You maintained financial control throughout your marriage, recognized the leverage it provided when necessary, and then built something new from that foundation. That's exactly the kind of real-world expertise our program needs, not just theoretical advice about saving for retirement. I considered her proposal as our meals arrived. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being invited to speak about financial empowerment by the woman who had once been involved in almost destroying my marriage. Yet there was something fitting about it too. A strange full-circle moment that highlighted how far we had all traveled from those painful days. What exactly would this entail? I asked, practical considerations overtaking my initial hesitation. A keynote at our annual Women's Leadership Conference in September, followed by a half-day workshop, she explained. We'd cover your travel, expenses to Indianapolis plus an honorarium. If it goes well, there could be opportunities to replicate the program at our other regional offices. By the time dessert arrived, we had outlined a preliminary agreement. I would develop a presentation focusing on financial autonomy within relationships, strategic planning for major life transitions, and investment literacy tailored to women in corporate environments. Melissa would send a formal invitation through her company's professional development department. As we prepared to leave, Melissa hesitated, then asked the question that had likely been on her mind throughout our lunch. How is Robert? I heard about his heart surgery through mutual connections at Hartwell. He's doing well, I replied, keeping my response measured. Fully recovered and working part-time as a consultant. He's quite involved with our grandson's life. She nodded, a complicated emotion flickering across her features. I'm glad. Despite everything, I never wished him ill. Nor did I acknowledged. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? Including this one, she said, gesturing between us. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be hiring my former lover's ex-wife as a speaker, I'd have thought they were delusional. I laughed softly at the absurdity. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Melissa offered a final observation. You know, when Robert first talked about you during our involvement, he described you as practical and organized, such bloodless terms. He never once mentioned how formidable you are. Men rarely recognize that quality in their wives until it's directed against them, I replied, surprising myself with the candor. Melissa smiled knowingly. I'll remember that lesson. Back at my office, I found myself reflecting on the strange encounter and the opportunity it presented. The invitation aligned perfectly with the foundation I was in the process of establishing, the Women's Financial Autonomy Project, funded largely by my portion of the pension. The foundation's mission was to provide financial education and resources to women navigating significant life changes, with a particular focus on those with limited access to professional financial guidance. That evening, I shared the news with Martin over dinner at his Hyde Park condominium. Our relationship had deepened over the past 2 years, evolving into a comfortable partnership that balanced independence with genuine intimacy. Unlike my marriage to Robert, where our identities had become increasingly entangled over 3 decades, Martin and I maintained separate homes and distinct lives that intersected by choice rather than obligation. Melissa Wells, Martin mused, pouring another glass of Bordeaux. The secretary herself wants to hire you as a speaker. There's a certain poetic justice in that. It's more than that, I said, trying to articulate the significance I felt. It's a chance to transform that whole painful chapter into something constructive, to literally profit from the expertise I gained through adversity. Martin's eyes crinkled with affection. You've always had a gift for alchemical conversion, turning life's lead into gold. Later that week, I mentioned the Indianapolis opportunity to Robert during our monthly lunch, a tradition that had evolved organically as our post-divorce relationship settled into a surprisingly comfortable pattern. We met at a small bistro near the university where Martin taught an occasional guest seminar, timing our meal to coincide with my partner's academic schedule. Robert's reaction to the news about Melissa's invitation was a complex mixture of surprise, amusement, and something that might have been pride. "You're going to speak at her company's women's conference about financial empowerment?" "It's a perfect fit professionally," I pointed out, "and the timing aligns with the foundation's official launch." He shook his head in wonder. "Life takes unexpected turns. When everything happened with Melissa, I never imagined you two would end up collaborating professionally." "We're hardly collaborating," I corrected him. "I'm providing a service her company is paying for. But yes, the irony isn't lost on me." Robert was quiet for a moment, absently stirring his soup. "She's done well for herself," he observed finally. "Senior management at Crestline already. She was always ambitious." I studied him, searching for signs of lingering attachment, but found none. Whatever infatuation had led him to risk our marriage had clearly burned out long ago, leaving only a detached assessment of his former paramour's professional trajectory. "Did she ask about me?" he inquired, attempting nonchalance. "Briefly," I confirmed. "I told her you were doing well and involved with James." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this simple summary of his life, and in truth it was accurate. Robert had found a kind of contentment in his scaled-back existence that had eluded him during his corporate climbing days. His relationship with Michael had healed considerably. His bond with Emma and baby James had deepened, and his health had stabilized under his new, less stressful routine. "I've been thinking about making some changes to my will," he said, shifting topics abruptly. "Now that James is here, and with Emma expecting their second child in the fall." This was news to me. "Emma's pregnant again? She hasn't told me yet." Robert looked stricken. "I thought she had. She told me last weekend when I was babysitting James. Please act surprised when she tells you." "I will," I promised, making a mental note to expect a call from our daughter soon. "What changes are you considering for your will?" He outlined his thoughts: a trust for his grandchildren, provisions for both Emma and Michael, and a request to the cardiac rehabilitation program that had been instrumental in his recovery. I listened attentively, offering suggestions based on my financial expertise, but careful not to overstep into managing his affairs as I once would have. "I'd like to include something for your foundation as well," he added, surprising me. "A percentage of my estate directed specifically toward the programs for women recovering financially from divorce." I felt an unexpected surge of emotion at this gesture. "That's generous, Robert. But why?" He contemplated the question, his expression thoughtful. "Because I understand now, in a way I didn't before, how financial inequality shapes relationships. How many women find themselves vulnerable because they've trusted their husbands to handle money without maintaining their own knowledge or control?" He paused, meeting my gaze directly. "I tried to exploit that pattern during our divorce. The fact that I couldn't, because you had always maintained your financial acumen, was ultimately better for both of us. Your foundation will help other women avoid vulnerabilities I would have taken advantage of. That seems like a worthwhile legacy." His candor still had the power to surprise me, even after 2 years of gradually rebuilding a post-marriage relationship. The Robert sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the entitled, self-absorbed man who had walked out on our 30-year marriage for his young secretary. This Robert possessed a humility and self-awareness that had emerged, phoenix-like, from the ashes of his former life. As summer progressed, preparations for both the Indianapolis conference and the foundation launch kept me busier than I had been in years. I hired 2 part-time staff members to help manage the growing administrative demands: Andrea, a recent MBA graduate with a background in nonprofit management, and Denise, a semi-retired accountant who had experienced financial devastation during her own divorce decades earlier. "Your story resonates with so many women," Denise commented one afternoon as we reviewed materials for the Foundation's first workshop series. The control you maintained over the pension, the way you leveraged it during the divorce. It's empowering, just hearing about it. It wasn't a deliberate strategy, I admitted. The pension protections were standard risk management, not preparation for divorce. I never imagined Robert would leave, let alone try to claim the pension exclusively. But that's precisely the point, Andrea interjected, her youthful idealism balanced by sharp, pragmatic insight. Women shouldn't have to anticipate betrayal. To protect themselves financially. Financial autonomy should be the baseline in any relationship, not a defensive measure. Her observation crystallized something I had been circling in my workshop development: the distinction between financial arrangements based on fear versus those founded on respect. My keynote for the Indianapolis conference began to take clearer shape, focusing on empowerment rather than protection, on proactive financial management rather than reactive defense. In late August, just 2 weeks before the conference, Emma delivered her second child, a daughter named Lillian Alice Hayes, honoring both her grandmothers. I flew to Minnesota immediately, spending 10 days helping with James, now an energetic toddler, while Emma and Daniel adjusted to life with a newborn. Robert arrived the day before I was scheduled to return to Chicago, creating a brief window where both grandparents were present. We established an easy rhythm of childcare sharing, with Robert entertaining James in the backyard while I helped Emma with feeding schedules and laundry. In quiet evening moments, we took turns holding Lillian, marveling at her tiny features and peaceful temperament. "She looks like you," Robert observed one night as I rocked our granddaughter to sleep. The same delicate profile, the same determined little chin. I studied the infant's face, searching for the resemblance. Perhaps. Though I see more of Emma in her. "It's strange," he mused, his voice low to avoid waking the baby. "When our children were born, I was so caught up in career building, in proving myself, that I missed so many of these quiet moments. Now, with grandchildren, I find myself present in a way I never managed as a father." "That's the gift of this stage," I replied. "The pressure is different. The stakes feel simultaneously higher and lower." He nodded in understanding. "Higher because time feels more finite. Lower because the primary responsibility belongs to someone else." As I prepared to leave for the airport the following morning, Robert offered to drive me, giving us a rare opportunity for uninterrupted conversation. The Minnesota landscape rolled past the car windows, verdant farmland stretching toward distant horizons, so different from Chicago's urban density. "I've been following the development of your foundation," Robert said as we merged onto the highway. "The website launch, the upcoming workshops. It's impressive, Alice. You've created something meaningful from what could have been merely painful." "It's been surprisingly healing," I acknowledged, taking experiences that felt so personal, so isolating in the moment, and transforming them into resources for others facing similar challenges. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Does it bother you speaking about our divorce publicly, even in the abstract?" I considered the question carefully. I don't share the intimate details, the affairs, the confrontation, the specifics of our settlement. But I do talk about the principles involved, the importance of financial literacy and autonomy regardless of marital status. It's less about our story specifically, and more about the patterns our situation exemplified. Robert absorbed this, hands steady on the steering wheel. "And next month you'll be speaking to Melissa's company about these same principles. Life has a strange circularity, doesn't it?" "Indeed," I agreed. "Though speaking of circularity, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that?" "Whatever happened to Sarah from marketing? After Melissa left, I mean." Robert's startled laughter filled the car. "You knew about Sarah all along, during the divorce negotiations?" "Of course," I confirmed. "Melissa provided copies of your emails. Catherine had them ready as leverage if needed." He shook his head in amazement. Sarah and I had lunch exactly twice. It never progressed beyond mild flirtation. After Melissa left and my health issues began, I realized I was spiraling into a pattern of seeking external validation rather than addressing the emptiness I felt internally. "That's surprisingly insightful," I observed, genuinely impressed by his self-awareness. "Cardiac events have a way of focusing one's perspective," he replied dryly. "As does losing a 30-year marriage and discovering your pension is partially controlled by the wife you betrayed." We shared a laugh at this succinct summary of his journey, the tension of past betrayals largely dissolved by time and mutual growth. As we approached the airport terminal, Robert grew more serious. "I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about forgiveness being a process rather than a moment. I've come to believe the same is true about regret. It isn't a single flash of recognition, but an evolving understanding of the ripple effects of our choices." I nodded, recognizing the truth in his observation. "And redemption? Is that a process too?" "The longest one of all, I suspect," he replied, pulling up to the departure curb. "One I'm still navigating day by day." I gathered my belongings, preparing to exit the car for my flight back to Chicago and the foundation launch awaiting me there. "You're doing better than you realize, Robert. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have even recognized the journey, let alone embraced it." He offered a small smile, acknowledging the assessment. "Safe travels, Alice, and good luck with the Indianapolis presentation. Even Melissa won't know what hit her once you take that stage." As I wheeled my suitcase toward the airport entrance, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary distance we had all traveled since that devastating discovery of Robert's affair. The pension that had become a battleground in our divorce had ultimately funded new beginnings for both of us. Robert's scaled-back life focused on family and health, my expanding professional role and the foundation poised to help other women secure their financial autonomy. In 1 week, I would stand before a room of corporate women in Indianapolis, Melissa Wells among them, sharing lessons distilled from both professional expertise and personal experience. In 2 weeks, I would officially launch the Women's Financial Autonomy Project, transforming private pain into public purpose. And somewhere in that momentum, in that alchemy of converting betrayal into empowerment, I had discovered not just financial security, but a deeper form of freedom, the liberty that comes from authoring your own next chapter, regardless of who wrote the previous ones. The pension that Robert had tried to claim exclusively for his new beginning had instead become the seed capital for multiple new beginnings. His, mine, and now potentially many other women's through the foundation's work. There was a certain elegant justice in that outcome. A balance sheet finally reconciled not through vengeance, but through growth. Not through punishment, but through purpose. As I boarded the plane to Chicago, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey. Not despite its painful detours, but because of them. The road from betrayed wife to empowered advocate had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to a destination richer and more meaningful than I could have imagined on that devastating day when I discovered my husband's betrayal after 30 years of marriage. The pension he had tried to take had become the vehicle for transformation neither of us could have foreseen, a fitting final balance in the complex ledger of our shared history. 5 years had passed since the divorce when I received an unusual invitation. The embossed envelope arrived at my office on a crisp October morning, bearing the logo of Hartwell Industries, Robert's former employer. Inside was an invitation to their Executive Leadership Awards Gala, an annual event recognizing outstanding contributions to the company and industry. I hadn't maintained any connection to Hartwell since Robert's departure, making the invitation puzzling. A handwritten note accompanied the formal card. "Your presence would mean a great deal. There's something important happening that evening." R. Curiosity piqued, I called Robert that evening from my condo. Our communication remained comfortable. After half a decade, evolving into a friendship neither of us could have predicted during the acrimony of our divorce. "A Hartwell Gala?" I questioned when he answered. "What's this about, Robert?" "They're presenting a Lifetime Achievement Award," he explained, his voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. Nervousness, perhaps. To me, actually. For contributions to the industry despite my early retirement. "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Congratulations, but why do you want me there? Surely Martin would be uncomfortable." "Martin is welcome too," Robert clarified quickly. "This isn't about our past, Alice. It's about acknowledging the full trajectory of my career, and you were instrumental in that success for 30 years. It wouldn't feel right to accept this recognition without you present." After discussing it with Martin, who encouraged me to attend, I accepted the invitation. The evening of the gala, I chose a sophisticated midnight blue gown that complemented my now silver-streaked hair, which I had stopped coloring 2 years earlier. Martin, handsome in his tuxedo, accompanied me to the downtown hotel where the event was being held. The ballroom glittered with corporate wealth, crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, string quartet playing softly in the corner. I recognized a few faces from company events I had attended during my marriage, though most were strangers. Robert found us shortly after our arrival, distinguished in his formal wear despite the slight stoop that had developed in his posture over recent years. "You came," he said, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "Both of you." "Thank you." Martin shook Robert's hand warmly. Over the years, the two men had developed a surprisingly cordial relationship, finding common ground in their academic interests, despite the unusual circumstances of their connection. "Wouldn't miss it," Martin replied. "Alice tells me this award is quite prestigious." Robert nodded. "More than I deserve, but I'm honored nonetheless." As dinner progressed through elaborate courses, I found myself seated at the front table alongside other honorees and executives. Robert was positioned at the center, with me to his right and the current CEO to his left. The seating arrangement raised a few eyebrows among those who knew our history, but Robert seemed unconcerned with corporate gossip. After dessert came the awards presentation. Several recognitions preceded Robert's Lifetime Achievement honor, each accompanied by polite applause and brief acceptance remarks. When Robert's turn arrived, the CEO introduced him with genuine warmth, highlighting his 3 decades of service and innovations in manufacturing processes that had become industry standards. Robert approached the podium amid enthusiastic applause, looking momentarily overwhelmed by the reception. He adjusted the microphone, thanked the CEO, and began his prepared remarks with a brief overview of his career highlights. Standard fare for such an occasion, acknowledging mentors and expressing gratitude to the company. Then his speech took an unexpected turn. "Success in business is rarely a solo achievement," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Behind every executive's career stands a network of support that often goes unrecognized and uncredited. In my case, the most significant support came from someone whose contribution to my success was immeasurable, though largely invisible to my colleagues." His gaze found mine in the audience. "My former wife, Alice Mitchell, who honored me by attending tonight, managed our family's finances with extraordinary skill throughout our 30-year marriage. While I focused exclusively on corporate advancement, she ensured our financial security through recessions, market volatility, and my occasional questionable investment ideas." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. "More importantly," Robert continued, "she established the financial frameworks that secured our retirement, including strategic management of the Hartwell Executive Pension Plan that many of us benefited from. The financial literacy workshops her foundation now provides for women nationwide grew from expertise she developed while I was busy in boardrooms, often oblivious to her quiet brilliance." I felt a flush of surprise at this public acknowledgement, so different from the angry accusations he had hurled during our divorce proceedings years earlier. Life takes unexpected turns, Robert said, echoing words I had spoken to Melissa years ago. Some self-inflicted, others beyond our control. When health issues forced my early retirement, the financial foundation Alice had built became my safety net, despite circumstances that would have justified a very different response on her part. He paused, seeming to gather himself before continuing. I mention this tonight, not to resurrect personal history, but to highlight an often overlooked truth in corporate America. Financial intelligence is as crucial to success as strategic vision or operational excellence. And in my case, that intelligence came primarily from Alice. This Lifetime Achievement Award, while bearing my name, reflects her contribution as much as mine. The remainder of his speech returned to conventional territory, industry observations, gratitude to colleagues, optimistic predictions for Hartwell's future. But that unexpected middle section, that public attribution of his financial security to my efforts, resonated through the room like a stone dropped in still water. After the ceremony concluded and the evening transitioned to cocktails and networking, several executives approached me with newfound interest, particularly women in senior positions. "Your foundation's work has been on my radar," said a vice president of operations, handing me her business card. "Would you consider bringing your financial literacy program in-house at Hartwell? We've been looking to enhance our women's leadership initiative." Similar conversations followed, creating potential opportunities I hadn't anticipated when accepting the invitation. By evening's end, I had collected a dozen business cards and promises of follow-up meetings. As the gala wound down, Robert found me near the coat check, where Martin was retrieving our wraps. "That was unexpected," I said quietly. "Your speech," he offered a small smile, "but accurate. I've had 5 years to reflect on our financial dynamic. The pension that became such a flashpoint during the divorce was as much your creation as mine. More so, frankly. It seemed time to acknowledge that publicly." "Thank you," I said simply. "That recognition means more than you might realize." Later that night, back at my condo with Martin, I stood on the balcony watching moonlight ripple across Lake Michigan. Martin joined me, wrapping a warm throw around my shoulders against the autumn chill. "You seem pensive," he observed. "Robert's speech?" I nodded. It was a form of closure I didn't know I needed. Public acknowledgement of what I contributed to our financial success, after decades of it being attributed solely to his career. Martin considered this. Recognition has power, especially when it comes from someone who once denied your contribution. Exactly. And the timing? I trailed off, gathering my thoughts. Next month marks 35 years since I first took control of our finances, established those investment patterns that eventually protected both of us. That young wife couldn't have imagined where the road would lead. Divorce, rebuilding, the foundation. Or us, Martin added gently, his hand finding mine on the balcony railing. "Or us," I agreed, leaning against his solid presence. The following week brought a surprising development. Hartwell's board of directors extended a formal invitation for me to join their pension oversight committee as an external advisor. The role would leverage my financial expertise and personal experience with their executive retirement program to ensure equitable policies for all employees. When I called Robert to ask if he had orchestrated this opportunity, he laughed. "I merely planted the seed with my speech. The rest was entirely your reputation and the foundation's growing influence. They need your perspective, Alice, especially as more women move into executive roles." I accepted the position, finding elegant symmetry in advising the very pension program that had become a pivotal element in my divorce and subsequent reinvention. The former secretary's wife was now helping shape retirement security for future executives and their spouses, ensuring protections existed for those who might someday face circumstances similar to mine. Life's circular patterns continued to surprise and delight me. The pension that Robert had tried to claim exclusively had funded not only my foundation, but now brought me back to its source as an advisor. The financial skills I had honed managing our family resources now benefited countless women through workshops, publications, and policy influence. Most remarkably, the divorce that had seemed devastating had ultimately liberated both of us to become better versions of ourselves. Robert more self-aware and humble, me more confident and purposeful. We had each found unexpected paths to fulfillment that might never have emerged had our marriage continued along its comfortable but stagnant trajectory. The control I had maintained over our finances, including that crucial pension, had provided not just security but opportunity, a foundation for building something meaningful from what could have been merely bitter. That, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all. That power wielded with wisdom rather than vengeance creates possibilities neither party could have envisioned during the painful severing of ties. As autumn deepened toward winter, I found myself more at peace with my entire life story, the 30-year marriage, the painful divorce, and the remarkable rebuilding that followed, than I ever could have imagined on that devastating day when I discovered my husband's betrayal and faced an uncertain future. 10 years after the divorce, I stood at a podium in a crowded university auditorium, surveying the audience of mostly women who had gathered for the occasion. Behind me, a banner proclaimed, "The Women's Financial Autonomy Project, celebrating a decade of empowerment." From its humble beginnings as a personal mission born from my divorce experience, the foundation had grown into a nationally recognized organization with programs in 47 states. What had started with workshops in community centers and libraries had expanded to include university partnerships, corporate training initiatives, and a best-selling book that had been translated into 11 languages. A decade ago, I began, I found myself at a crossroads many women face, confronting betrayal, divorce, and the prospect of financial insecurity after 30 years of marriage. The audience quieted, leaning in to hear my story, which had become something of an origin myth for the Foundation's work. What separated my experience from countless others was a single factor. Throughout my marriage, I had maintained financial literacy and control. When the crisis struck, I wasn't starting from zero. I was leveraging knowledge and systems built over decades. I paused, surveying the diverse faces watching attentively. Young professionals just starting their careers, middle-aged women in various stages of marriage or partnership, seniors concerned about retirement security, all united by a common purpose: financial empowerment. The pension that my ex-husband tried to claim exclusively became the seed funding for this foundation. What was intended as an instrument of his new beginning instead created thousands of new beginnings for women across the country. As I continued my address, highlighting the Foundation's accomplishments and future initiatives, I noticed familiar faces scattered throughout the audience. Emma, now a successful physician with 3 children, sat beside her brother Michael, whose software company had recently gone public. Their spouses flanked them, part of our extended family now. Martin, my partner of 9 years, watched from the front row, his proud smile warming me as it always did. Though we had chosen not to marry, our relationship had deepened into a profound partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. We maintained separate residences but shared much of our lives, finding balance between togetherness and independence. And in the back row, less noticeable but undeniably present, sat Robert. At 72, his once dark hair was now fully white, and a cane rested against his chair, the lingering result of a minor stroke 2 years earlier. He attended with his wife of 3 years, Patricia, a widow he had met through a cardiac rehabilitation support group. After my speech concluded and the ceremonial cake cutting commenced, I circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing the Foundation's work with supporters and beneficiaries alike. Eventually, I made my way to where Robert and Patricia stood near the refreshment table. "Magnificent speech," Patricia said warmly, giving me a brief hug. I had come to genuinely like this straightforward woman who had brought contentment to Robert's later years. A retired nurse, she approached life with practical compassion that complemented Robert's more analytical nature. "She's always been magnificent," Robert added, leaning slightly on his cane, though I was too blind to see it for much of our marriage. "Ancient history," I said lightly, touching his arm briefly. "What matters is that we're all here now, celebrating something positive that emerged from difficult circumstances." Patricia excused herself to greet an acquaintance, leaving Robert and me in one of our increasingly rare moments alone. 10 years, he mused. Hard to believe so much time has passed since the divorce. Harder still to believe how much has changed, I replied. For both of us. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I was reading through some old journals recently, from the early days after our separation. I barely recognized that man anymore. So entitled, so convinced he was the wronged party despite his own actions. We've both evolved, I acknowledged. That's the gift of crisis, painful as it is at the moment. It forces growth that comfort rarely demands. Robert smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. The foundation really is extraordinary, Alice. Not many people transform personal pain into such widespread benefit for others. The pension made it possible, I reminded him, referencing the financial cornerstone that had once been our greatest point of contention. The pension was just money, he countered. The vision was entirely yours. Our conversation was interrupted by Andrea, now the Foundation's executive director, requesting my presence for a photo with major donors. As I turned to leave, Robert caught my hand briefly. I meant to tell you, James called yesterday. He's been accepted to Northwestern's business program for fall. James, our eldest grandchild, now 18, and following an academic path that echoed both his grandfather's and mine. With a focus on nonprofit management, Robert added proudly. He says his grandmother's foundation inspired his career choice. A circle completing itself, I thought with satisfaction as I rejoined the celebration. Later that evening, a smaller gathering assembled at an upscale restaurant downtown. Family, close friends, and key Foundation personnel. 3 generations of our extended family filled a private dining room, including all 5 grandchildren ranging from 18 to 3 years old. As dessert was served, Emma tapped her glass for attention. We can't let this milestone pass without acknowledging something remarkable, she began. 10 years ago, when Mom started this foundation using her portion of Dad's pension, none of us could have imagined its impact. She gestured toward me with evident pride. But what's most extraordinary isn't just the Foundation's success. It's how my parents transformed what could have been a bitter ending into something healing for themselves and beneficial for thousands of others. Michael stood to join his sister. Growing up, we thought our parents' marriage was perfect, stable, loving, secure. Learning otherwise was devastating. But watching them navigate the aftermath with eventual grace and wisdom taught us more about resilience and redemption than any perfect marriage could have. Unexpected emotion tightened my throat as my children spoke. Martin's hand found mine under the table, offering quiet support. So tonight, Emma concluded, raising her glass, we celebrate not just a decade of the Foundation's work, but the journey that made it possible. The full circle from betrayal to healing, from loss to creation. As glasses lifted around the table, I found myself locking eyes with Robert across the room. Something unspoken passed between us, acknowledgement of the complex path we had traveled, appreciation for where it had led us both. The gathering continued late into the evening, generations, mingling, stories flowing. My youngest granddaughter, Lily, eventually climbed into my lap, her small head heavy against my shoulder as she drifted toward sleep. As I stroked her hair, I marveled at how far beyond myself the ripples of my life choices had extended. Touching my children, my grandchildren, and thousands of women I would never meet. The pension that Robert had tried to claim exclusively had funded not just my security, but a legacy that would outlast both of us. The financial acumen I had cultivated throughout our marriage had grown beyond personal protection into a movement empowering others. In the decades since our divorce, both Robert and I had found our way to better versions of ourselves, not despite the painful ending of our marriage, but because of how we had each responded to that crucible. We had moved from adversaries to allies in a larger story neither could have written alone. As the celebration wound down and farewells were exchanged, I stood with Martin at the restaurant entrance, watching Robert and Patricia depart. He moving, carefully with his cane, she attentive, but not hovering. Emma and her family followed, then Michael and his, each carrying a piece of both Robert and me forward into futures we could only glimpse. "Happy?" Martin asked simply, his arm warm around my shoulders. "Beyond anything I could have imagined that day I found those emails," I replied honestly. "When one door closes, another opens," he finished. "Though sometimes we need to build that door ourselves and have the financial security to afford the materials," I added with a smile, ever practical even in metaphor. Stepping into the cool evening air, I felt the satisfying weight of completion, not just of the anniversary celebration, but of a journey that had transformed betrayal into blessing, control into creation, and an ending into countless new beginnings. The pension that had once symbolized my husband's attempt to abandon me after 30 years had instead become the foundation for my most meaningful contribution to the world. In the ledger of life, no balance could have been more perfect. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe. And hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.